Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Brownfield Weekly Livestock Market Update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Tom Stieber, in for Megan Grebner this week. And with us is the University of Missouri livestock economist Scott Brown. Scott, it's good to be with you again.
Same, Tom.
Well, let's talk first about the markets. We see that the cattle, it's been a mixed week, really, if we talk about cattle and hogs in general. First, the cash cattle market. There is some good news there.
That's right. If we look at live fed cattle prices this week, we were up about 72 cents. If we look at the feeder cattle side, cash feeder cattle prices were anywhere from steady to $4 higher this week. So we did get strength in those cash markets on the cattle side this week.
And yet boxed beef was flat, not much change there.
That's right. You know, the choice box beef price this week averaged about $2.17, which was virtually unchanged from the week before. I look at that and I go, the good news is that's still well above where we were a year ago at this time, roughly $8 a hundred above year ago levels. So we continue to see those box beef prices that have really been moving sideways much of 2019, but remain well above where we were this time a year ago.
Yeah, that put some pressure on the futures prices overall. Is that where that pressure came from?
So I think we can continue to have uncertainty about some of the trade effects as we saw those cattle futures contracts, both live cattle that was April contract down 70 cents this week, and the March feeder cattle futures down $1.65. Got a little bit of bump in corn futures this week that might have been responsible for some of the weakness that we saw in feeder cattle futures.
Hog market, cash hogs are down $1 for the week. What's behind that?
I think they continue to see the weakness in the pork cutout value. If we start there first, down $1.55 again this week on that pork cutout value. And if you look back at Valentine's Day, it wasn't so good for the pork industry. So that was the lowest pork cutout value we had seen since December of 2009. So we're certainly at the low end of that pork cutout value as bellies quite volatile this week, but on Thursday we're near $1 a hundred. I think that's really what's translated into lower cash barrel and gilt prices. We're down about $1 again this week. So trend hasn't been so good for the pork industry as we've started 2019.
Yet the futures are higher.
They are higher this week. That April lean hog futures contract closed up $1.55 on the week. I think we continue to maybe see some hopeful signs that some agreement between China and the U.S. can be found here in the next few days and giving some hope to markets. And I think we continue to talk about the effects of African swine fever and what that really means. So on again, off again, strength in terms of U.S. hog prices longer term.
Retail prices seem to have changed too. Actually, that report is out. So what's happened in retail prices as far as meats are concerned?
Yeah, so it's good to see some retail price information. Given the government shutdown, we're finally getting some things beginning to catch up. That January choice beef retail price came in at $5.86 a pound. That is 10 cents above a year ago level. So strength on that side of the equation. Unfortunately, when we get the pork retail price information, there we came in at $3.71 a pound for January of this year. That's 4 cents below where we were a year ago at this time. So I don't want to read too much into that, but I do like to remind us that beef demand's been really strong, and I think that's been helpful to retail beef prices. Yet on the pork side, as we continue to struggle on the trade front, and that's both pork exports as well as byproducts, that's kind of spilt over into retail pork prices as we probably end up with more products going through domestic channels than otherwise would be the case.
People in the business seem to be having high hopes about these trade talks that are going on with China currently at the end of the week.
When you see the kind of expansion that we have going on in pork production, we need some positive news out of those trade talks, or we're going to continue to perhaps see 2019 be a pretty tough year for pork producers as we continue to see expansion going on there.
Consumer confidence index is out. What is that showing us?
Yeah, so I go a little bit of mixed bag, I guess, is the way I read what's out of the February consumer confidence information that we got today. First of all, if you look at it relative to a year ago, that overall index was actually down 4.2%. So weakness relative to where we were a year ago. Yet the February number is actually 4.7% above where we were in January. So a little bit of strength relative to where we started the year, but we still need some help to get back to where we were a year ago at this time. I don't want to read too much into that consumer confidence report, Tom. We did those consumers were surveyed likely in the middle of a lot of conversation about a potential second shutdown, which it appears we're going to avoid that second shutdown here, and so I think a lot of that confidence might have been affected by their view of whether or not the government was going to shut down for a second time. And so we'll wait and see what we get as we move forward. But let's hope that's not a trend that continues as we go through the remainder of 2019.
Yeah. Scott, you and I were just talking about some statistics that are pretty interesting. The USDA long-term ag base baseline. What is that showing us, and what does that tell about the future if we look into the past that way?
Yeah, so this is kind of that 10-year, let's look in the future and see where these industries are headed. I took a minute to put together changes in U.S. beef and pork exports over that long period of time, just to remind us that a lot of us that are doing long-term projections, including USDA, would suggest the U.S. is in for growth in terms of both beef and pork exports. In particular, if you look over the next decade, USDA gave us a growth in U.S. beef exports of about 246 million pounds over the next decade, while on the pork side, even a larger growth, up over 800 million pounds over the next decade. That just tells you that some of the growth that we see in production, hopefully we'll talk about that being exported now. I want to make sure that as we compare those, so we're not number one in terms of the growth in either one of those. The European Union, USDA suggests, will be up 2.2 billion pounds in pork exports over the next decade, while, for example, Brazil would be up 1.8 nearly billion pounds on the beef side. So there are other countries also talking about growing exports, but at least we're in the top three in many of those categories. And the destinations, if you look at the import side of the equation, probably aren't too surprising to us. China, South Korea, Mexico, all set there. Japan, all important markets for growth over the next decade. So just a little bit of glimpse there longer term. I often use that just to kind of set the tone for longer term movements in U.S. beef and pork markets, and that information certainly suggests that we're going to depend much more on international markets going forward.
And of course, what has happened this week, what's transpired in these talks with China, would also tell a lot about the volatility of this, or the changeability of this information.
Absolutely. I tell folks all the time that these kind of trade talks, so they create opportunities at times. When there are periods of very positive information coming out of those talks, it might be an opportunity for producers to lock in some higher prices. Yet when we get some negative news out of those talks, it's probably not so good for markets. Ultimately, it depends on what we get in terms of an agreement. So let's hope that as we, as the U.S. and China negotiate, we can find an agreement that hopefully gets tariffs removed that have been in place on things like pork and soybeans.
In the coming week, we're going to count cattle, and we're going to count what's in cold storage.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things we get here, right? So cattle on feed next week. It'll be our look at what January cattle on feed was supposed to do. So USDA beginning to catch up on that front. It will be good to see what inventory looks like in many of those large yards. And then again, cold storage coming out on next Friday as well. Give us a little bit of look at what's in freezers at this point in time.
Well, with that, Scott, thanks for being with us. It's been a pleasure to talk to you this week again.
Thanks a lot, Tom.
You betcha. To have your weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday, you can visit our website, brownfieldagnews.com, and you can click subscribe. You can also submit questions and comments. And for market updates twice daily, make sure you check out John Perkins' Market Minute. Have a great weekend, everyone. For Megan Grebner, I'm Tom Stever on Brownfield.